Hey team, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going to look at SQL Server string functions. I hope you get a lot out of this because these are used all the time. Let us understand the ascii and the char function. These are string functions. Notice ascii, I have A. I could have put any of these letters in there and it will return me its corresponding number. Notice A is 65. Had I picked F, what would F or J give me? What would J? J would give me 74. Notice the answer is down here. So you understand the ASCII. I just turn character into number. Now char does the opposite way. I pick a number and it gives me a letter. Notice 66. Where's 66? 66 is B. Excellent. 75 is K. Excellent. Now, why do you need to know these numbers? Well, as a programmer, we kind of only need to know these offsets. So capital A begins with 65, and as you see here, 65, capital B, 66, and so forth. Little a is 97, 0 starts at 48, and these are just two common ones that are used all the time. The quote is 34, and the space is 32. Let me teach you a quick trick. If you have a 101 key keyboard, hold down the Alt button. Press your thing right there, hold down the Alt, and then come press 65 on the keypad. Notice it printed the letter A. Well, I could have said Alt 48, and that will print me 0. And there you have it. In this example, we're looking at charindex. How can we figure out where the comma is located? Well, charindex is just that function. So you say select charindex, what pattern are you looking for? And then here is my source. So I say, let's trim all that, take all the spaces off both sides, and then let's find that comma. And then here you can see I'm doing a select command. Let's actually execute that, see where we're at. Notice that it's telling us it's at position 11. But notice that if I use a smaller city name like Tampa over here, and I do that same little lookup, it tells me that I'm at position 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Very good. But here's something a little bit bigger where I'm going to use the substring and I'm going to trim that, and I'm using that charindex. So I'm going to get out the name of the city. Let's do this. Let me put a comment on this. We don't need that no more. Let's re-execute. So it got me Tampa. How about we do something a little bit longer? Winter Garden. Isn't that sweet? Let's look at Concat. Notice select Concat A, comma B. It just puts A and B together, concatenates them. Here I'm going to concatenate software, a space, and their nuggets, software nuggets. That's the name of our channel here. Now, software, space, nuggets, space 2001. Easy. Okay, now we get a little harder. How about now I'm going to use quotename, and I'm kind of going to make it like key value inside of a concat. And notice here, key value. Pretty nice, yeah? And there you have the concat. Here you can see we're using Datalength, and the data type is char. Char is fixed length. Char says I'm going to use 10 bytes. Let's see what Datalength reports. Notice char is of type 1 character, so there's 1 character per character. If I come and say nchar is 2 characters per 1, so this right here should be, you guessed it, 20. Now, if I come over here and put an n in front of this character, which I should on all n chars and varchars, you should still get the 20. Now, if we look at varchar for a variable length string, notice that it says v1 varchar 10, but I only have 5 characters. The length that this consumes, the number of bytes, is actually only 5 bytes. Varchar is a type 1, so 5 times 1 is 5. Now if I come and add another space, I'm at 6 because it's variable length. If I add another byte in the front, it now goes to 7. Now if we change this data type to n varchar, it's a good idea to put the n in front of your pattern. Now notice this is saying, hey, I'm 5 bytes long, but I'm using the Datalength method. So each character, because of n varchar, is 2. So 5 times 2 is 10. And if I add another character in the back, I'm at 12. If I add one in the front, I should be at 14. It's 14 because 7 times 2, the n represents 2 characters, n varchar, and there you have it. Let us review FormatMessage. Notice here I've got FormatMessage, and then I have 2 placeholders, a number and a string. Notice I'm putting 12 into the first %d and then Scott into %s. In the next one, I'm going to be printing 255 into %d and then 255 into this x. This x is uppercase hex. And notice if I want that to go lowercase x, I just use a little x, make that happen. Nice. Now look at this alignment between the minus and no minus. Notice here when we use the minus, we are left aligned, and notice it takes up 20 characters. Notice that when I don't use the minus, it will be right aligned and it'll be padded to the left. And our last one is I'm coming at a table and I want to use FormatMessage, and notice that I'm going to put the business entity ID into the first placeholder and then login ID, that's the name, into this %s. Let's execute that for all the users. And there you have it. And that is FormatMessage. So look at the Ltrim. Ltrim means left trim. So see all these spaces here? We're going to build up to that. Let's start at the very beginning. Ready? If I take the data length of this thing right here, how big is this right here? Well, because it's a varchar, I'm just going to take how much size this takes. So you can see this takes 3 characters, right? Let's just do that simple one. Now, if I do the data length and I Ltrim that, notice there's no characters right now. This right here will also give me 3. Now, if I put this in between a bracket and a bracket, well, pipe, and I do that, it'll just be, they'll be touching each other. And on the last one, if I Ltrim that, that means if I had some spaces there, it would be touching the sides. Now let's start introducing some padding. I'm going to introduce 1, 2, 3. So the data length of this right here, I mean, everything is going to change now. Notice here I put 3 spaces, so the data length is 6. The size, because I trimmed it, is still 3. And notice on this original one, I have 3 spaces here, and then I Ltrimmed it, so it went away. So Ltrim removes spaces from the left. That's all you have to know. Now you need to practice this for varchar, char, n varchar, and char to truly master this one. In our first example of using rtrim, first of all, we're going to review data length again. Notice here I said char for 10, and here's my pattern. By default, data length looks at because I'm using char, it looks at my length. So data length, this would give us 10. But when I say data length of the rtrim of this no longer looks at the raw data type. But if I was to write this out to disk, how much space would that consume? Well, because this is a char, this would produce 3 characters. And then I put pipes around the values so you can see the padding. So notice the data length is 10. The number of bytes when we use the trim is down to 3. And then here you can see the spacing around there. Now notice that if I were to use the trim method, we could move that away, kind of like what I did here. Now this is for the char. For the n char, well, the n char works just like the char, but the size now is times 2. Char is 1, n char is 2. So let's see how this works. And you can see that consumes a total of 20 bytes when it's in its raw mode. And when I trim it, it will be 2 times the number. And here we're just looking at the trim functions. But in another unrelated thing, you're starting to understand the difference between varchar and char. Char, when you give me 10, consumes all the spaces on disk as well as nvarchar. Your variable length variable types, nvarchar and varchar, only the contents. So here you can see the data length of v1, well, we know that one would be 10. This is a type 1. Then I'm going to trim this. Trim means take it from both this side and that side. Let's actually see what this looks like. And notice that it trimmed it to 3 characters. And notice by default it does that padding. It does padding because the char says, hey, let's use all these characters. Let's put some spaces before and after and run it through this. And notice here, when I trim, all the spaces are gone. And notice the original one has spaces before and after. They're preserved. Here you can see that I'm casting now as today's date. And then I'm going to say take the right of the string of the year of now for 2. And let's print that out. So we should get, of course, 21. And notice here I say the string of 12. If I don't put on Ltrim and I just say, well, let's just do another SQL statement. Select the string of 12. Notice they all have all this spacing around it, right? So if I take the Ltrim of that, trim it from the left, it'll look like this. And if I do the trim of this, it trims it from both sides. Sweet. And notice here that it kind of didn't give me my decimal part, right? So now if you want to start getting the decimal part, you have to use more parts of the string function. This right here is the total size, and this is like how many decimals you want. So here you can see I want it to be about 5 long, and let's use only 3 decimals. And notice that we get 1, 2, 3. Here we want it to be 6 long and only 3 decimals, so we'll get 12.345. And here we're going to use the floor of 123.55. So now the floor, what it will do is it will go down to 123, and then watch what it does to the decimal. Zeroes it out for 3. Sweet. And here we're just going to go to the ceiling on 123.45, so the ceiling will take us up to 124 and pretty much give us that same looking output. And there you have the string method. In this example, we are going to take this variable city in uppercase F and uppercase L, Fort Lauderdale. It uses all of this code here, and what I've done is just shown you that we can do it all together. For instance, I'll execute just part of this at a time. Notice that we can, notice I got the capital F, and then my next section, we were able to get Fort, and then we're going to get the capital L in Lauderdale, and then we'll get the rest of the city name. Notice here I've declared v1 varchar 1000. I have a bunch of characters in here. Let's see how many I have in there. So you can see I have 126. Can you imagine I have a field on my screen that only has, like 25 characters? I don't want to see, like it messed up my form, making my whole form shift to the right. So what we can use is the substring. I only want the first 23 characters, and then I can concatenate it with ... Let's see this work. Let's put another comment here and then execute. And notice we have the starting for 23 characters ... Inside of our form, we could then have the hyperlink and show the title and have the entire caption. But in the form, I don't need to see all of the text. Let's now look at quotename. Notice in the old days, this is the way we would do it, to put brackets around values. Now, all we have to do is say select quotename, and we can get the same like brackets around things. By default, this is what you get. If I want the open and close parentheses, you just put a parentheses there. Notice that automatically give you the close. And then if I want like maybe the curly, execute that. Now, when would you use this? Well, has anybody ever done the pivot table? And at the bottom, you're doing like an in clause. And sometimes, you have, like quite a few columns. Well, you can use this right here to actually generate all those patterns for you. If you go look up this on the internet, how to use pivot table in SQL Server software nuggets, scroll to like the very last minute of that video. I will show you how to use this in real time so you don't have to do a bunch of typing. So I really do use this all the time, especially every time I'm using the pivot table, so I don't have to do a bunch of typing. And there you have it, the quote name. This is probably one of my favorite functions of SQL. It's called replace. And what you do is you tell me the source, tell me what to look for, and tell me what you want me to place revalue with. So notice here at pattern, varchar 30, has Nicole gone to school? I want to replace Nicole with she. Let's see how that works. Has she gone to school? Sweet. Here, you see I have another placeholder called curly here, close curly. And then I'm going to say replace that string called date of accept, and I'm going to look for this pattern here with the curly braces, and I'm going to put the date in that. Sweet. Here, I'm going to have a social security number, and I want to replace all these little minus symbols, the dash, with nothing. And we got two more examples, but it's on one example. I'm just going to show you a little bit. Here you can see I have the open and close curly. I want to kind of get rid of them. And then on this guy right here, I kind of remove all those characters I don't want to see. Let me put a minus here so we don't have to see that again. Ready? This is the numbers. And there you have replace. Here we're going to use replicate. I'm going to replicate the asterisk 80 times. I'm going to repeat it with this pattern 30 times. Then notice here I'm in a while loop, and what I'm doing is I'm going to replicate 0. I'm going to get the length of that string, and then 6 minus whatever the length of that string is. And I'm going to put the number of zeros, and I'm going to concatenate that pattern with the number. Let's see what happens here. And as you guessed, I just zeros everything. Notice the length of this is 6, and I just prefix it with a bunch of zeros. And I have one more example. In our previous example, we used concat, replicate, and trim in one line, and I had to get the string length. Here is kind of like a simpler way. Remember, programming, there's always 1,000 ways to do things. Here, I'm going to take the right. Notice I'm just concatenate all 6 characters with that, and then I'm just going to take the right for 6. Pretty much giving me the same result as the previous one. And there you have replicate. And now we'll look at the write function. Notice we're declaring a variable word as varchar 50. I'm going to take the right of word for 4. Notice I'm trimming it. That will remove the spaces here. Notice we have lose. In our next example, notice that we're going to use the right of the SSN for 4. That'll cherry pick 2, 3, 4, 5 off this one. And in our next one, notice that we are going to remove the dashes we've just replaced. In our previous example, we just took out the elements without the dashes. Let's look at both of them together. And there you go. In our last example, notice that we have a phone that's varchar 25. We're going to be using the write function. Here's the source, and the offset will be take the length and then minus where this begins. And write takes the n number of characters. Let's run this. And there you have it. One way to use the reverse function in SQL is to test for a palindrome. Notice that I have a set of words here, and we can go through there. For instance, the word level, is that a palindrome or not? Level is. How about civic? Civic is. And how about chief? Is not. And that's how we can use the reverse.